Blue Box is doing something I find really interesting, taking elements from sports anime and romance anime to create something that doesn't easily sort into either. The two leads each have a goal of making it to nationals in their respective sport, and both indirectly support the other in this quest with inspiration and encouragement. Alongside this, though, our male lead Taiki has a massive crush on the older female lead, Chinatsu. This is the well-worn anime pairing of popular girl and less popular boy, and the sports element itself is part of that dynamic. Chinatsu has higher status than him in several aspects: a bigger star, a more widely admired student, and a year older. Taiki then feels he is inadequate as a suitor. It's a very common, broadly observable trend in hetero couples that when it comes to status, women tend to date across and up, while men date across and down. Even though they are shown to have several things in common and are even living under the same roof, Taiki feels he isn't close enough to where she stands to have much of a shot. Thus, while Taiki does love his sport of badminton for its own sake, he sets a lofty goal of making it to inter-high in his first year in the belief that it would erase some of this gulf between them. Now, I really want to talk about some of the nuanced interactions we've had so far, an arena where I think the series excels, but first I want to keep following this sports/romance thread a bit. As I pointed out in the previous show, Blue Box is absent almost all of the typical sports anime elements in its premiere. There is no plot line around trying to get someone to join a sports club, nor one involving someone having quit a sport in the past. We have no example contests, no establishing of rivals, no segments establishing an aspect of a sport's mechanics for the benefit of the audience. We don't even have a singular sport, as Taiki and his friend Kyo play badminton, Chinatsu plays basketball, and his other friend Hina does rhythm gymnastics. Through 5 episodes, though, some of the more familiar sports staples have peeked in. Practice montages, qualifying tournaments, intra-team rivalry, a match with personal stakes, performer-audience dynamics with other students, and examples of how the stress and realities of sports competition impact personal life. It is in one respect borrowing the structure of a typical sports anime, and for good reason. Sports anime are often well structured because the flow of a sporting season, with its building stakes and intermediate resolutions, very closely mirrors a pleasing narrative of rising and falling action. A final goal with clear milestone goals along the way gives us an easy sense of progression, especially compared to the squirreliness and uncertainty of a romance narrative. Despite this, the show is absent things you would expect of something sports-focused. Explanations around the sport in question are extremely scarce. Even just looking at Taiki's badminton, there has been no attempt to ensure the audience has enough information to keep up with what is happening. Nothing around what constitutes a point, rules of service or scoring, and what comments do exist are relatively broad, such as Taiki being slow to recover, or talks about smashes being hard, or whatever. What I'm driving at is that the audience is not being immersed in the details of the sport such that we can appreciate the drama within the athletic contest itself, for a very simple reason. The drama in the series is somewhere else. Taiki's crush on Chinatsu occupies the most central part of the tension, and its portrayal is where the work is earning its keep. When you're into someone like he is, everything related to them seems louder, crucial, and fraught with peril. The more tenuous your connection to another, the more easily it is severed, and so especially at first, he feels great pressure simply to not blow it. A lot of the early part of the work to endear us to Taiki is contrasting his earnestness with his embarrassment. He really wants to interact with Chinatsu, and really fears he keeps screwing it up. There is 2 great instances in just the premiere episode. The first is a morning when the gym is not yet open, and so neither of them is yet occupied with practicing their sport. A golden opportunity. Taiki wants any excuse at all to start a conversation, but Chinatsu is actually reading something he doesn't understand, and he is perhaps not confident enough to strike up small talk with no pretext either. When she sneezes, though, it's like a tiny, cracked doorway that he immediately tries to rush through, offers his scarf, his hot tea, his gloves, even little hand warmers in his enthusiasm, before realizing that he might have overcommitted a bit. Luckily for him, Chinatsu is pretty easygoing, and can make a disarming joke about what else he might hand her, as well as having a little fun with him after reading his name off of his scarf. Taiki is understandably abashed, but nevertheless made a kind of cute impression and is a little less of a stranger to her. However he may be internalizing it, I think it counts as success. The second instance comes near the end, when Taiki learns that Chinatsu's family is moving away, and he can put two and two together to realize that she must have been informing her coach of this during the serious conversation he witnessed. He will rush to where she is and make this breathless proclamation about how she shouldn't give up, how he learned about working hard towards goals from her, and so on, and it is, again, him overcommitting in his enthusiasm relative to their actual relationship. But worse than that, he doesn't even have the full picture. She is not leading with her family, and is already intending to do the very thing he is trying to encourage. Understandable then why he later beats himself up over such a desperate display. But this is arguably an even greater victory than the thing with the scarf, because she reveals that a previous conversation they had factored into her decision. Serving as a source of inspiration and direction to your crush is progress no matter how you slice it. And Taiki should take comfort and even pride in the role that he played. But instead, his naked earnestness has him wanting to crawl in a hole. I feel like I say this a lot. I do say this a lot. But it applies here, so I'll repeat myself. Earnest people are very easy to mock and very easy to admire. Being a teenager, Taiki feels scrutinized, and sharing authentic parts of yourself or naked enthusiasm is often just setting yourself up for grief from your peers. But the other side of that is admiration. Taiki wins over the audience when he is genuine, not when he plays it cool. And Chinatsu, I imagine, would not have been so influenced by his memory of her if he'd been flippant or even neutral about what it meant to him. But that's the perspective we can have as third parties. It's much easier for us than for him. The person who mocks the earnest is not the same person who admires them. I think it's easier to understand the dynamic in the series if we keep this dichotomy in mind, that his nervousness over embarrassing earnestness will often stay his hand, but others may perceive it differently than he does. With all that said, there's several little interactions that I want to highlight as examples of what I think the story is doing well. The first is when Chinatsu has moved in and just taken a bath and comes to visit him in his room. He is a complete basket case in the situation. A popular girl in his room, in loungewear, smelling of the bath, and also, the girl he is down bad for? We can surmise that all of those are novel experiences for him. It's like first date jitters, but without any chance to prepare himself. When she sees his copy of Jump and gets in close, he doesn't know how to handle it. He's attracted to her, and she's right in his space in a way he's never seen her, and this is all he can think about, causing him to back up like a frightened animal. But then she says that she's glad. It's nerve-wracking living in someone else's house, but someone she sees at morning practice and will lend her Jump takes some of the edge off. It makes it all a little less foreign. She is relieved. What he feels, though, is guilt. He's all worked up over being a guy and a girl under the same roof. That is the way in which he sees their situation. But she's in a completely alien environment and sees him as a comforting familiarity. That he would be thinking in romantic or attraction terms now feels wrong to him. He wasn't thinking about her experience and perspective, clouded by his own confused thoughts. When he goes to take his bath and can't help but imagine her having been in there before him, he wonders if she thinks nothing of living with a guy, that perhaps he's the only one acting like an idiot. I appreciate taking this moment to force him out of his own perspective and empathize with her, as I feel like it ends up coloring the way he behaves towards her as a roommate from then on, and heads off some of the potential trouble that could have resulted. He'll articulate the problem itself in the 5th episode, saying that he's sure she'd feel uncomfortable being hit on by her housemate. Thus, his barrier is not just the perceived gap between them, but his own sense of propriety. She's going to live with them for 2 years. If he makes it awkward now by making an unwelcome advance, then he's really putting her in an uncomfortable position. A part of what makes him sympathetic is that realization, that what he wants might inconvenience her, and so he should think twice. Another nice bit is when he leaves his wallet at home and Chinatsu brings it to him. Kyo makes him understand what kind of trouble he might be courting if other people knew she was staying with him, and his friend Hina in particular is sure to spread that information far and wide. Since Hina is present in the scene, he abruptly cuts Chinatsu off, hoping to hide that she came from his place. He motions with his head towards Hina by way of explanation. She understands that Hina is the reason he's acting this way, but interprets it as him having a crush on her, and thus not wanting Hina to learn that he's living with a female classmate. There's two things I really like about how this played out. One is that Chinatsu did not take it in the most offensive, most dramatic way. That is, assuming that he hates her or is embarrassed by her, or anything else that would seem out of proportion. She made a reasonable conclusion and did him a solid by playing along. However, she also was not completely neutral in her reaction. I feel like there was a slight sense of hurt or rejection, visually represented for us by lowering her head and hiding her eyes. I find her feeling a little stung to be pretty believable. After all, this came just after he shared his goal of reaching nationals as a first year and her gifting him the ankle bracelet. She should have good reason to expect that they might be friendly, and this seems instead like he wanted them to pretend to be strangers. Thus, the other part of this that I liked is that this misunderstanding does not overstay its welcome. It arises and is resolved within one episode. Taiki senses the sudden awkwardness, worries that he might even have made her hate him. Luckily, his friend Kyo, or Kyo Bro, if you will, has enough of an outside perspective and sarcastic wit to keep Taiki from freezing overlong in his fretting. Despite the risk and his nerves, he approaches her and the subject and discovers she was being even more conscientious than he would have guessed. They are thus able to clear it up, apologize for the confusion, and in the process become one step closer to one another. I find this a far more plausible version of miscommunication and resolution than what we often get in teen drama anime. Next, I want to look at two examples of Taiki's assumptions and how the series basically has fun with him about them. The first concerns his anxiety concerning Haruyu-senpai. Haruyu seems to have all the advantages that Taiki lacks when it comes to Chinatsu. He is an actual star on the badminton team, is a year older, and classmates with Chinatsu to boot. In fact, they're the two class reps, and is generally more confident and popular, and, frankly, more manly than Taiki. We can imagine that, in Taiki's mind, if he had all the qualities of Haruyu, then he wouldn't feel so outclassed by her, that his reservations about pursuing her would disappear. He imagines that he's the kind of guy she would probably be more likely to go for. When he sees the two of them talking at times then, and especially when he hears the nickname Chi, Taiki becomes afraid that he has been beaten to the punch, that Chinatsu and Haruyu are talking and, in his mind, are thus a more likely pairing than he would be. I find this a believable fear for someone in his situation, who is attracted to Chinatsu but doesn't yet know her well enough to even gauge whether Haruyu would be someone of interest. He just knows that his badminton senpai seems to have everything he doesn't. Now, Taiki's fears are unfounded, but that's not the part I find interesting. Haruyu turns out to have a girlfriend, a recent development, in fact, and Chinatsu had been helping him shop for her. Haruyu, though, despite having all these qualities that Taiki covets, was in basically the exact same position. The girl he crushed on was someone he considered out of his league. She's in showbiz, someone of higher status to his mind, and he had given up on ever really being together. But she didn't see it the same way, and in fact is the one who asked him out. Haruyu and Taiki both made assumptions about their worthiness to the girl they were interested in. If Haruyu had the wrong of it, why wouldn't the same apply to Taiki? The other instance to draw attention to happens in two parts. When Taiki accidentally takes Chinatsu's gym clothes with him to school, they must figure out how to meet up and make the exchange without giving away that they're living together. This ends up being more of an ordeal than expected, and eventually they meet on the roof, where she ends up changing due to being short on time. Now, just like with the earlier situation of her in his room, Taiki's imagination can't help but spin up a bit, hearing the rustle of her changing clothes on the other side of the wall. Because that seems surprisingly intimate to him, he again wonders if she just doesn't think of him as a guy. She is unbothered to be changing clothes in such proximity because she doesn't think of him that way, which is an unpleasant thought if he hopes to win her affection. However, a later instance arises where he is practicing outdoors, and Chinatsu notices his shirt is inside out. He immediately, almost thoughtlessly, strips to correct it. Chinatsu gets an eyeful of his lean machine, and apparently was a little surprised, maybe even a little flustered. She can't help but try to explain away her sudden blush by commenting on his six-pack. Again, though, the surface outcome is not what I'm interested in, but rather Taiki's erroneous assumption. He reasoned that Chinatsu must not see him as a guy if she is willing to change in such proximity to him. Well, he absolutely sees her as a girl, but nevertheless didn't think much of switching his shirt around in her presence. He again has the wrong idea about what these interactions mean when it comes to Chinatsu. Amusingly, while the audience can pick up on these incongruities, I don't think Taiki himself has internalized the lesson. One thing he does comprehend, though, is possibly the best example of the nuance I like in the story so far. It happens just after this shirt-changing bit. It's clear that he's working out some nerves, probably why he had the shirt on inside out in the first place, and Chinatsu tries to get him to ease up a bit. She'll remind him that he's already put in the work, she'll demonstrate a pressure point for relaxation on top of his head, and then she'll remind him that he still has next year and the year after. While she means well, she doesn't know why he's in such a rush in the first place. Since he's not about to tell her either, he ends their otherwise nice exchange a bit abruptly. The next night, he'll overhear Chinatsu talking about that encounter with his mother. While his mother also doesn't understand his rush, Chinatsu says she realizes that what she said could be taken as her telling him that he's free to lose this year. That is, that the work and effort he has put in don't matter as much since he'll have other chances. He'll reflect that this is true, but really, his reaction was being sad to be reminded that he is a year behind her. Chinatsu will then go on to share that she thinks part of it was being reminded of how fast this year was going by, that she is actually envious of Taiki for having that extra year and extra chance when she does not. It was her insecurities coming out, not altruism. I appreciate how this example takes the time to highlight how complex and potentially confusing communication can be. Chinatsu said something that on the surface is just encouragement. Taiki didn't receive it well, but because of something she couldn't possibly have known about. Then, on reflection, she realizes how it might have come off, but that wasn't the way Taiki took it either. And then she shares a second envious motivation behind her words, something she wasn't thinking at the time, and definitely something Taiki did not suspect. Thus we have this complicated dance between the literal meaning of words, the intent behind them, the intent as it is interpreted, and unknown circumstances in the minds of those involved which the other party is not privy to. Honestly, it's a wonder people can ever make themselves understood. That wasn't the end of it either. When Kyobro manages to set Taiki up on an aquarium outing with Chinatsu without him even knowing it, what a wingman, Chinatsu will use the opportunity to bring that conversation back up. She apologizes for being insensitive and wanted to make sure she did so while they were out. While Taiki is deflated a bit to have his hopes dashed that this may have been a date, he will think about how she must have had that hanging over her for a week. He tells her that she's being too considerate, but internally, he has a moment to try to empathize with her yet again. If he was living in someone else's house, he might also feel like he needed to be extra considerate. And so he makes this cute but meaningful gesture of sending her the unique penguin sticker, saying she can always simply text that to him if she ever feels uncomfortable living with them and needs to talk about it. Basically, the sticker skips any of the potential misunderstandings that we have already seen from using words. He's giving it a single meaning, creating a clear line of communication for her. And though she gives him the deflatingly neutral reply that he's a good housemate, her sending the sticker back to him a few times and covering her mouth is what I would interpret as promising. I understand, though, why he both wants to hope and is determined to squelch that hope. Now, episode 5 ends on something of a cliffhanger, with Hina discovering Chinatsu coming back to his house. But she can't know that it's a secret living arrangement, and is sure to interpret it as her visiting his house because they are far closer than they've let on. But since the series has avoided the most melodramatic outcomes thus far, I'm inclined to suspect that this does not spill the secret to the whole school or anything. In fact, they might immediately call Chinatsu's phone and discover Hina before any confusion can spread. But what I do think will result is Hina facing that she likes Taiki. The whole 5th episode is full of little hints, and both Kyo and Chinatsu have moments to notice that Hina is acting like someone with a crush on him. She just doesn't yet realize it, I think, and the thought of Chinatsu coming to his house for a secret tryst will probably be enough to push her over the edge. If nothing else, I expect another complex example of miscommunication and resolution to build on what the work has established so far.